3 months ago, I accidentally got into the wrong Uber at around 1:15 in the morning. I didn't realize it at first. Everything about it seemed normal, until the driver quietly locked the doors. I had just finished closing the restaurant where I work in downtown Chicago. It was late, cold, and the streets were mostly empty except for a couple bars still open nearby. I stepped outside, pulled out my phone, and ordered an Uber like I had done hundreds of times before. The app said a driver would arrive in about 3 minutes. I remember leaning against the wall outside the restaurant while I waited, just scrolling on my phone and barely paying attention to the street. About 2 minutes later, a dark gray sedan slowly pulled up right in front of me. The timing seemed perfect, so without thinking too much about it, I walked over and opened the back door. "Hey," I said as I got inside. The driver didn't respond. I didn't really think that was strange, though. Some drivers just don't talk. I buckled my seatbelt and leaned back as the car pulled away from the curb. For the first minute, everything felt completely normal. The driver was wearing a black jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, and he kept both hands steady on the steering wheel. The streetlights passed across the windows as we drove away from downtown. But after about a minute, something started to feel off. Usually, when I'm in an Uber, I hear the navigation voice from the driver's phone giving directions. Turn left in 300 feet, or something like that. But this car was completely silent. No navigation voice, no phone mounted on the dashboard, just the quiet hum of the engine. I leaned forward slightly to check the dashboard. Confused, there was no phone anywhere. That's when I started to feel a little uneasy. "Hey," I said from the back seat, "do you have the address?" The driver didn't answer. He didn't even move. His eyes stayed locked on the road ahead. Another minute passed, and then I noticed something else that made my stomach tighten. Instead of heading toward the highway that leads to my neighborhood, the car turned onto a darker side street lined with warehouses. I frowned and pulled out my phone to check the ride. The Uber app was still open, but the screen hadn't changed. It still said, "Searching for drivers." My chest suddenly felt tight when I realized what that meant. The ride had never been accepted. I slowly looked up toward the driver again. I think there's been a mistake," I said carefully. "I don't think you're my Uber." For the first time since I got into the car, the driver reacted, but he didn't turn around. He just lifted one hand slowly from the steering wheel and pressed the lock button. Click. The doors locked. My heart immediately started pounding. "All right, that's not funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just pull over and let me out." The car kept moving down the empty road. The buildings around us were getting darker and farther apart. I grabbed the door handle beside me and pulled. It didn't move. Locked. "Hey, seriously," I said louder now. "Pull over." That's when the driver finally spoke. His voice was low and calm. "You got in." I froze. "What?" He kept staring straight at the road. "You opened the door. You sat down." My stomach twisted. "Yeah, because I thought you were my Uber." The driver let out a quiet chuckle. "You should check next time." The car slowed slightly as we approached a red light at a completely empty intersection. For a second, I thought he might actually stop and let me out. But instead of stopping, he slowly rolled through the red light and kept driving. My breathing was getting heavier now. I looked back down at my phone, my hands shaking slightly as I checked the app again. It still showed searching for drivers. Then the driver spoke again. "Relax." I didn't like the way he said that. After a few seconds, he added something else. "You're lucky you didn't fall asleep." A cold chill ran through my body. "Why?" I asked quietly. The driver didn't answer right away. The car turned onto another dark road with almost no streetlights. Finally, he spoke again. "Most people do." My chest felt tight. "Most people?" I repeated. He shrugged slightly as he drove. "Late-night riders, long shifts. They get in the back seat, and eventually they fall asleep." I felt like my brain didn't want to fully understand what he was implying. "Pull the car over," I said again. This time, the driver actually slowed down. The car rolled to a stop on the side of the road. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached forward and pressed the unlock button. Click. The door beside me unlocked. "Get out." I didn't hesitate. I shoved the door open and stepped out of the car immediately. The cold air hit me as I backed away from the vehicle. The driver didn't even look at me. He just kept both hands on the steering wheel. Then, before driving away, he said one last thing. "Check the plate next time." The car slowly pulled away and disappeared down the dark road. I stood there for a few minutes trying to calm my breathing before finally ordering another ride. But later that night, when I got home and thought about everything, I remembered something that made my stomach drop. When I first got into that car, the back seat smelled strongly like medicine. At the time, I thought it was just some kind of air freshener. But after thinking about what the driver said, I'm pretty sure it wasn't medicine. It smelled like sleeping pills.
About 4 months ago, I stopped at a gas station in the middle of the night that I'm pretty sure wasn't supposed to be open. It was around 2:10 a.m., and I was driving back home after visiting a friend who lives about an hour outside the city. The highway was mostly empty, and I'd already been driving for almost 40 minutes when I realized my fuel was getting pretty low. Normally, I would have waited until I reached a larger town, but the fuel light had already turned on, and the last thing I wanted was to get stuck on the side of a dark highway in the middle of nowhere. After another couple miles, I saw a small gas station sitting just off the road. It looked old and a little run down, but the lights were on, so I pulled in. There were no other cars in the parking lot, which didn't surprise me considering how late it was. The only sound was the quiet humming of the overhead lights and the faint wind moving across the empty road nearby. I parked next to one of the pumps and stepped out of the car. The air was cold and completely still. I remember looking around for a second because the place felt strangely quiet, like the kind of quiet where even small sounds seem louder than they should be. I started filling the tank, watching the numbers slowly climb on the pump screen. While I was standing there, I noticed the convenience store window on the front of the building. There was a cashier inside, standing behind the counter. At first, I didn't think much about it, but after a few seconds, I realized something strange. The cashier wasn't doing anything. He wasn't looking at a phone or cleaning or stocking shelves. He was just standing there, and he was staring directly at me through the window. I looked away at first because it felt awkward, but after another moment, I glanced back again. He was still staring, completely motionless. The pump clicked when the tank filled up and I put the nozzle back in place. For a second, I considered just leaving, but I remembered I needed a drink for the rest of the drive. I walked toward the entrance and pushed the door open. A small bell above the door rang when I stepped inside. The store smelled faintly like old coffee and cleaning chemicals. The cashier was a middle-aged guy with tired-looking eyes and a gray hoodie, but the strange part was the expression on his face. He looked tense, like he was trying to warn me about something without speaking. "Hey," I said casually as I walked toward the fridge to grab a drink. The cashier didn't respond. I grabbed a bottle of water and turned around to walk back to the counter. That's when I noticed he was still staring at me the same way he had been through the window, except now he was slowly shaking his head, not aggressively, just slowly side to side. "You all right?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he quickly grabbed a pen and a small receipt paper from the counter and started writing something. My stomach started to feel slightly uneasy as I watched him scribble the words. After a second, he lifted the paper and held it up so I could see it. It said, "Don't turn around." My first reaction was confusion. I actually looked at him like it was some kind of joke. "What?" I said quietly, but the cashier wasn't smiling. In fact, his face looked even more tense now. He slowly pointed behind me, then quickly shook his head again. "Don't turn around." I felt my heart starting to beat faster. The store suddenly felt much quieter than it had before. I could hear the faint buzzing of the fluorescent lights above us. And then I noticed something else. The sound of breathing. Not mine. Someone was standing behind me. I hadn't heard the door open, I hadn't heard footsteps, but I could hear someone breathing just a few feet behind me. My entire body felt frozen. The cashier stared at me with wide eyes and very slowly reached under the counter like he was grabbing something. I kept my eyes locked on him, too scared to move. Then I heard a voice from directly behind me. "You work here?" My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. The cashier slowly shook his head again. The breathing behind me got closer. "Then why are you still here?" the voice said. At that moment, the cashier suddenly pulled something up from under the counter. It was a baseball bat. Without warning, he swung it as hard as he could toward the person standing behind me. I heard a loud crack, followed by a heavy thud hitting the floor. I turned around immediately. A tall man wearing a dark hoodie was lying on the ground just a few feet behind me. One of his hands was holding a knife. The cashier stepped around the counter, breathing heavily. "He walked in 5 minutes before you," he said, "and he's been standing there, waiting." I looked down at the man on the floor, then back at the cashier. My hands were shaking. "Waiting for what?" I asked quietly. The cashier looked toward the knife, then back at me. "You."
About 5 months ago, I had an experience on the subway that I still think about almost every time I take a train now. It happened late on a Sunday night in New York around 11:50 p.m. when I was heading back to my apartment after visiting a friend in Brooklyn. Normally, the subway's crowded, even late at night, but that evening, the station I was at was strangely empty. I remember walking down the stairs to the platform and hearing my footsteps echo off the tiled walls because there was almost nobody around. The only other person I noticed at first was a guy sitting at the far end of the bench, hunched forward and staring down at the ground. I didn't think much about him. People in New York mind their own business, and that's usually the safest thing to do. After about 2 minutes, the train finally rolled into the station with that loud metallic screech you always hear when it slows down. The doors opened and I stepped inside one of the middle cars. What immediately struck me as strange was how empty it was. There were maybe 3 or 4 people scattered across the entire carriage. One woman was sitting near the front reading something on her phone, another guy had headphones in and was leaning against the window, and an older man was sitting alone near the back corner with his arms crossed. I sat down near the center of the car and put my backpack on the seat beside me. The train doors closed and we started moving through the tunnel. For the first couple minutes, everything was completely normal. The train rocked slightly back and forth the way they always do underground, and the lights flickered occasionally as we passed through darker sections of the tunnel. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling just to pass the time during the ride. After about 2 stops, I noticed the woman who had been sitting near the front suddenly stood up and moved quickly into the next car. I remember thinking that was a little strange because the train wasn't crowded at all, so there was no reason to switch seats. A minute later, the guy with the headphones also stood up and walked into the next car without looking at anyone. That's when I realized the only people left in the carriage were me and the older man sitting in the corner. I glanced toward him briefly. He was staring straight ahead at the train door across from him, completely motionless. The train continued moving through the tunnels for another couple minutes before arriving at the next station. The doors opened, but nobody got on. Nobody got off either. That's when the older man slowly turned his head and looked directly at me for the first time. There was something about the way he was staring that made me uncomfortable almost immediately. His expression was blank, like he was studying me. I looked back down at my phone, pretending not to notice. A few seconds later, I heard him stand up. His shoes made a quiet scraping sound against the floor as he began walking down the aisle. I assumed he was just moving to another seat, but instead he stopped about 2 rows in front of me and just stood there, facing me. I glanced up slowly. He was still staring. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The man didn't answer right away. He looked around the empty train car for a moment, then leaned slightly closer. "You shouldn't be in this car." I frowned. "Why?" The man looked toward the door connecting to the next carriage. "Everyone else left." I shrugged. "Yeah, I guess they just moved seats." The man shook his head slowly. "No." A strange silence filled the train car. The lights above us flickered once as the train moved through another tunnel section. "They didn't move seats," the man said quietly. "They left because of him." My stomach tightened. "Who?" I asked. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly turned his head and looked toward the far end of the train car. I followed his gaze. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed something that made my chest feel cold. The door connecting to the next carriage was slightly open, just enough for someone to stand in the gap between the cars. And there was someone standing there, completely still. A tall figure wearing a dark jacket, half hidden in the shadows between the cars. I hadn't noticed him before. I wasn't even sure how long he had been there. "He's been watching you since the last station," the older man said quietly. My heart started pounding. The train slowed as we approached the next stop. The figure in the doorway didn't move. The train doors opened. The older man suddenly grabbed my arm. "Get off," he said. I didn't argue. I grabbed my backpack and stepped off the train as fast as I could. The older man stepped off right behind me. The doors closed and the train started pulling away from the platform. For a brief moment, I looked through the window as the car passed by. The figure was still standing between the cars, staring out at the platform. And he didn't blink the entire time the train disappeared. I still remember that night clearly. Even now, years later, whenever I hear the distant rumble of a subway train, my chest tightens a little. I had just finished a late shift in Manhattan. It was close to 1:20 a.m., and the city had that strange quiet it gets after midnight. Not silent, never silent, but calmer. The kind of quiet where every sound echoes a little longer than it should. I walked down the stairs into the subway station on West 4th Street, rubbing my eyes and checking the time on my phone. The platform lights were dim, flickering slightly, and there were only a few people scattered around. A man in a suit was asleep on a bench with his head tilted back. A couple stood near the far end of the platform, whispering to each other, and an older woman sat near the middle, clutching a grocery bag like it was something important. The next downtown train wasn't supposed to arrive for another 8 minutes. That's when that phone started ringing. At first, I ignored it. I assumed it was one of those random spam calls. But then it rang again, immediately after the first one ended. I frowned and pulled the phone out of my pocket. The screen said, "Unknown number." I almost didn't answer, but something about the timing felt strange, so I picked it up. "Hello?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard breathing. Not loud, not aggressive, just slow, steady breathing coming through the speaker. I pulled the phone away from my ear and checked the screen again. "Hello?" I said again, louder this time. The breathing stopped, and the call ended. I stood there for a second, staring at the phone, trying to figure out if it was some kind of prank. Around me, the platform was still quiet. The couple at the far end were still talking. The man on the bench was still asleep. I shook my head and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Then it rang again. Same number. Unknown. This time I answered faster. Look, if this is a prank, a voice interrupted me. Don't get on the train. I froze. The voice was quiet, calm, almost careful. Who is this? I asked. No answer. Just silence. Then the call disconnected again. I wish I could say I ignored it and went home like a normal person. But the thing about the human brain is, once something strange happens, you start noticing everything. Suddenly, the station felt different. The flickering lights above me seemed darker. The empty tracks looked deeper somehow. Even the sound of the ventilation fans felt louder than before. I checked the arrival board. 2 minutes until the train. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just some bored person making weird calls. But then my phone vibrated again. Another call. Same number. I hesitated, then answered. What? I said, a little annoyed now. The voice came back immediately. You're still there. My stomach tightened. Yeah, I said slowly, I'm still here. Who is this? The voice didn't respond right away. Instead, I heard something else. A sound in the background. A subtle pause. A train horn, but not the one approaching the station. No. This one sounded distant, echoing through tunnels. Then the voice spoke again. You need to leave the platform. I looked around, annoyed now. Why? Silence. Then, because you're the only one who can. The line went dead again. At that point, I actually laughed a little. It felt ridiculous, like someone was messing with me for no reason. The train headlights appeared in the tunnel. Bright white light cutting through the darkness. The familiar roaring sound of wheels on steel tracks grew louder as the train rushed toward the platform. And that's when something strange happened. The old woman with the grocery bag suddenly stood up. Fast. Too fast. Her eyes darted around the station like she had just realized something terrible. Then she turned to the couple down the platform. Did you hear that? The couple looked confused. Hear what? The guy asked. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she looked straight at me. Her face had gone pale. Your phone. Was that your phone ringing? My chest tightened. Yeah, I said slowly. She stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. Like she was afraid of the answer she was about to hear. Did the voice tell you not to get on the train? My heart skipped. How do you know that? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the tunnel, where the train was now seconds away from arriving. The wind from the approaching train rushed through the station. Paper trash skittered across the floor. And then the woman whispered something that made my stomach drop. Because my phone rang too. And suddenly, 3 more phones started ringing across the platform. The sound of those phones ringing all at once echoed across the platform in a way that made the whole station feel suddenly smaller. Not louder exactly, just wrong, like the sound didn't belong there. I looked around quickly. The man who had been sleeping on the bench jerked awake as his phone vibrated violently in his hand. He blinked, confused, staring at the screen like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The guy from the couple pulled his phone from his pocket too. Ring, ring, ring. 3, 4, maybe 5 phones ringing at once. And every single one of them showed the same thing. Unknown number. The train was almost here now. I could see the full headlights blasting through the tunnel. The ground beneath the platform vibrated slightly as the steel wheels screamed closer. The old woman grabbed my arm. Don't answer it. I looked at her. Why? She shook her head slowly. I don't know, but something about this feels wrong. Across the platform, the guy from the couple had already answered his phone. Hello? He listened for a second. Then his expression changed. Confusion, turning slowly into fear. What? He said. His girlfriend leaned closer. What did they say? He didn't answer her. Instead, he both stared at the train doors like they were trying to decide something important. Meanwhile, the ringing had stopped. Every phone was silent again. And that's when my phone vibrated once more. I already knew what the screen would say before I even looked. Unknown number. My hands felt cold as I answered it. Hello? For a moment, there was only static. Then the same quiet voice returned. We're still there. Yes, I said. The voice sounded relieved. Good. I felt my chest tighten. What is going on? I asked. Silence for a few seconds. Then the voice said something strange. Look at the third car. I slowly lifted my head. The train doors were open. Passengers were beginning to step inside. But I focused on the third car from the front, just like the voice said. At first, nothing looked unusual. Just rows of seats, metal poles, a few tired passengers. Then I noticed something. Every single passenger in that car was sitting completely still, not moving, not checking their phones, not talking, just sitting, facing forward, like mannequins. The longer I stared, the stranger it looked, because none of them blinked, none of them shifted. They were completely frozen. I leaned slightly toward the old woman. Do you see that? She squinted toward the train. Then her eyes widened. Oh my God. Across the platform, the guy from the couple noticed too. What the hell? His girlfriend grabbed his arm. Stop messing around and get on. But he didn't move. The man who had been sleeping earlier suddenly spoke up. My call, it said something about a third car. The air suddenly felt colder. My phone crackled again. The voice spoke faster now. Listen carefully. Okay, do not let anyone board that car. My heart started beating faster. Why? The voice hesitated. Then it answered. Because that train isn't stopping at the next station. I frowned. What do you mean? It always stops. The voice interrupted me. Not tonight. The doors were about to close. People were stepping inside. One man had already entered a third car. He grabbed the pole and stood near the door. Everything looked completely normal. And yet, every instinct in my body was screaming that something was very wrong. Wait, I said into the phone. Who are you? There was a long pause. Then the voice answered quietly. Someone who didn't get off in time. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? The voice took a slow breath. Then it said something that made my blood run cold. I'm calling you from tomorrow. For a second, I thought I had heard it wrong. Calling from tomorrow? That didn't even make sense. The noise of the station faded a little in my head, like everything around me had been pushed into the background. The voice on the phone didn't sound like it was joking. It didn't sound dramatic either. It sounded tired, like someone who had already tried explaining this 100 times and knew nobody would believe it anyway. I swallowed slowly and looked back toward the train. The third car was still open. People were stepping into the other cars without even noticing anything strange. But that third one, those passengers still hadn't moved. Not even a blink. Not even a shift in their posture. Just sitting there, perfectly still, like something had frozen them in time. I leaned closer to the phone. What are you talking about? I whispered. The voice took another slow breath. I got on that train, it said quietly. Last night, same station, same time, same car. My chest tightened. And? I asked. The voice paused. Then it answered in a way that my skin crawled. And the train never stopped. I looked back at the platform clock. 12:41 a.m. Everything suddenly felt colder. That's impossible, I said under my breath. The voice ignored that completely. You're standing near the middle of the platform, right? It asked. I froze slightly. Yeah. The voice continued, calm but urgent. There's an old woman next to you. Gray coat, curly hair. She keeps looking at the third car. My heart skipped. Slowly, I turned my head toward the woman beside me. She was staring at the train exactly the way the voice described. I felt a chill run down my spine. "How do you know that?" I asked. There was a pause. Then the voice answered in a low whisper, "Because yesterday, I was standing where you are." My grip tightened on the phone. Across the platform, the guy from the couple looked more nervous now. He kept staring at the third car too. His girlfriend was already inside the second car, waving at him impatiently. "Come on," she shouted. He hesitated near the doorway, looking back toward us like he was unsure what to do. The man from the bench was watching the train with wide eyes now. He rubbed his face like he was trying to wake himself up from a bad dream. My phone crackled again. "Listen carefully," the voice said. "In about 10 seconds, the doors are going to close." I looked toward the train. The warning lights above the doors had already started blinking. My stomach twisted. "And when that train leaves," the voice continued quietly, "the third car will be full." I frowned. "What do you mean? It's already—" "No," the voice interrupted softly. "Right now, those people aren't passengers." The sentence hung in the air for a moment. Something about the way it said "people" made my skin prickle. "Then what are they?" I asked. The voice didn't answer immediately. Instead, it said something else. "Watch carefully when the doors close." The station speaker crackled faintly overhead. A mechanical voice announced the next stop. The girlfriend inside the second car was still calling for her boyfriend to hurry up. "Just get on," she said. He finally stepped inside, but he stayed close to the doorway, still looking back toward the platform. The warning chime sounded. Beep, beep, beep. The doors began sliding shut. I forced myself to keep looking at the third car like the voice told me to. At first, nothing happened. The frozen passengers were still sitting there, perfectly still, eyes forward. Then, right before the door sealed completely, one of them moved. It was subtle, so small I almost missed it. A woman sitting near the center seat slowly tilted her head, just a few degrees, not toward the aisle, not toward another passenger, toward the platform, toward me. My breath caught in my throat. Then another passenger moved. A man near the door slowly lifted his chin. His eyes slid sideways toward the glass, toward the people outside, toward me again. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud, and in that exact second, every single passenger inside the third car turned their heads toward the window at the same time. My phone crackled softly. The voice whispered something that made my blood run cold.
You ever have one of those memories that just sticks? Like you can close your eyes and you're right back there? For me, it's my sophomore year of high school. A random Wednesday morning around 10:15. I remember the exact time because we had just started second period English. The sun was actually out for once, streaming through those big, dusty classroom windows. Mrs. Carter was at the front, scribbling something about theme and symbolism on the whiteboard. You know the vibe. Half the class was daydreaming. Someone was tapping a pencil rhythmically, tap, tap, tap. And a couple of guys near the back were trying to hide their phones under their desks. It was normal. Completely, boringly normal. Then the intercom clicked. You know that sharp, static pop right before an announcement? It usually means someone's car is getting towed or a student needs to go to the office. But this time, the air in the room just changed. Attention students and staff, please listen carefully. The school is now entering a level 1 lockdown. This is not a drill. Teachers, lock your doors immediately. Students, stay away from windows and remain silent. I repeat, this is not a drill. The room went dead silent. Mrs. Carter dropped her marker. I still remember the sound of it hitting the floor. Clack. She didn't even say anything. She just walked to the door, checked the hallway for a split second, and then she locked it. She killed the lights and pulled that little black curtain over the door window. Everyone, get to the back corner, now. Leave your bags, just move. We scrambled. Usually during drills, someone cracks a joke or whispers, but not today. We huddled on the floor, squeezed between the radiator and the back bookshelves. I was sitting next to this guy, Leo. I could see his hands shaking. I realized mine were too. A few minutes went by. The only thing you could hear was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the heavy breathing of 30 terrified teenagers. Then, Leo leaned in and whispered, "Dude, my friend in the gym just texted. She said the cops are already in the parking lot. Something's happening." "Put that phone away," Mrs. Carter hissed from the front of the room. She was standing by the door, her ear pressed against the wood. That's when we heard it, from the far end of the hallway. Stomp, stomp, stomp. Footsteps. But they weren't running footsteps. They weren't the sound of a police officer in heavy boots. They were slow, heavy, like someone was dragging their feet just a little bit with every step. Slide, stomp, slide, stomp. My heart was beating so hard, I thought the person next to me could hear it. The footsteps got louder, closer. They passed the science lab. They passed the janitor's closet. And then they stopped, right outside our door. A few minutes went by. In the dim light, I saw the handle move. It turned down, slowly, all the way to the stop. Then it jerked back up. Nobody move. The handle rattled, hard, like whoever was out there was trying to rip the door off the hinges. It went on for 5-10 seconds, just violent, angry shaking. And then, silence. The footsteps started again. Slide, stump, slide, stump. They headed towards the cafeteria until we couldn't hear them anymore. We sat in that dark corner for 45 minutes. When the police finally knocked and told us to come out, I practically collapsed. Later that afternoon, the rumors started. Some people said it was a prank. Others said there was a guy with a weapon. But the truth was way worse. Our school has top-of-the-line security cameras. They cover every inch of those hallways. After the lockdown, the police and the principal sat down to watch the footage to identify the intruder. They watched our hallway from 10:15 to 11 a.m. The camera showed the hallway empty. Then it showed Mrs. Carter locking the door. And then, for the next 20 minutes, the hallway remained completely vacant. But we saw the handle move. We all saw it. The police watched the footage of our door. On the video, the handle never turned. The door never shook. There was nobody there. To this day, Mrs. Carter won't talk about it, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw. Something was in that hallway. Something that the cameras couldn't see, and it wanted to get in. I still don't like being near doors when it's quiet. You never know who or what is on the other side.
I still remember the exact moment that morning stopped feeling normal. It was a Thursday around 10:15 a.m., second period. Nothing special about the day at all, just another boring school morning. I was sitting in the back of my history class, half listening to Mr. Carter talk about the Civil War while I stared out the window at the football field. The sky was bright, the sun was out, everything felt calm, almost too calm. Mr. Carter was in the middle of writing something on the board when suddenly my phone buzzed on the desk.
That wasn't unusual, except it didn't stop. Buzz, buzz, buzz. 3 calls in a row from my mom. I frowned. She never called me during school, ever. I flipped the phone over so the screen faced down, thinking I'd deal with it later. But then the kid next to me looked down at his phone too, and then another kid across the room did the same thing. Within about 10 seconds, you could hear phones vibrating all over the classroom, little buzzing sounds everywhere. Mr. Carter turned around slowly. Phones away, guys, you know the rule. But nobody moved. Everyone was just staring at their screens. The expressions on their faces were weird, confused, nervous. Then suddenly, Emily, the girl sitting in the front row, raised her hand halfway. Her voice sounded shaky. Mr. Carter?" He sighed and put the marker down. "Yes, Emily." She held up her phone, quietly. "My mom just texted me saying there's a lockdown." The whole room went silent. Mr. Carter blinked. "No, there isn't. If there was a lockdown, we would hear it on the intercom." But then another student spoke up, nervous. "My dad just called me. He said the police are outside the school." Pause. Now Mr. Carter looked a little unsure. He walked over to the classroom door and cracked it open, peeking into the hallway. From where I was sitting, I could see the empty corridor stretching both directions. No teachers, no students, just the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. He slowly closed the door again. "All right, everyone just stay seated for a moment." That's when my phone buzzed again, a text from my mom. "Are you safe? Lock the door." My stomach dropped. Whisper. That was the exact moment I felt something was really wrong. Mr. Carter walked over to the classroom phone on the wall and tried calling the office. We could hear the faint ringing through the receiver. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. He hung up slowly. Okay, maybe the office lines are busy. But then something happened that made the entire class freeze. From somewhere down the hallway, we heard a loud bang. Not like a locker slamming, heavier. Pause. Like a door being kicked shut. A few students gasped. One girl actually covered her mouth. Mr. Carter immediately turned and locked the classroom door. I heard the click of the deadbolt. Then he reached up and pulled the blinds down over the door window. Low voice. "Everyone move away from the windows." Now people were whispering, chairs scraping, desks shifting. A kid near the middle of the room muttered under his breath. Panicked. "Dude, what if there's actually someone in the building?" Another student snapped back, angry whisper. "Shut up, man." I checked my phone again. More messages. Friends from other classes texting the same thing. "Are you in lockdown? Police outside? My sister says someone called 911. None of it made sense. Then suddenly, the classroom phone rang. Everyone jumped. Ring, ring. Mr. Carter stared at it for a second before picking it up. Careful voice. "Hello." We watched his face as he listened. At first, he looked confused, then concerned. "Yes, this is room 214. He paused again. "Understood." He slowly hung up the phone. Now the whole class was staring at him. Emily spoke first, scared, whisper. "What did they say?" Mr. Carter took a breath. Controlled voice. "The office says to begin lockdown procedures immediately. Lights off, everyone against the back wall." You could hear people breathing faster now. Someone quietly started crying. The lights clicked off, and the room dropped into this dim gray shadow from the window blinds. We all moved toward the back of the classroom, squeezing between desks and the wall. Whisper. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Minutes passed. No announcements, no sirens, just silence. Then suddenly, my phone rang. Not buzzed, rang. The sound was so loud in the quiet classroom that everyone turned to look at me. I quickly covered the speaker with my hand and looked at the screen. Unknown number. Nervous whisper. I almost declined it, but something told me to answer, so I held the phone to my ear. Quiet. "Hello?" At first, there was nothing, just static. Then I heard breathing, slow, heavy, uneasy pause. A voice finally spoke, low, calm, almost amused. "Is this room 214? My blood cold. I didn't answer. The voice continued, soft chuckle. "Tell your teacher the lockdown started early for a reason." The line went dead. Shaky breath. I slowly lowered the phone and looked at Mr. Carter. He noticed the expression on my face immediately. Concerned whisper, "What is it?" I swallowed. Quiet. "Someone just called me asking if this was room 214. The color drained from his face. Long pause. And that's when we heard footsteps right outside the classroom door.
I still remember the exact moment it started. The thing is, nothing about that morning felt unusual. And looking back, that's probably the scariest part. It was just a Wednesday, second period English. Everyone was half asleep, just drifting while Mrs. Carter's marker squeaked against the whiteboard. The room was so quiet. You could hear people flipping through notebooks and the faint hum of the radiator. I was sitting near the window, just staring out at the empty football field, wishing I was anywhere else. Then my phone vibrated on the desk. Now, that alone was weird. Our school is like a lead box. Terrible signal. Usually, messages wouldn't even go through until lunch. I glanced down. It was a number I didn't recognize. No name, just a string of random digits. I opened it, and my heart did this weird little skip. The message said, "Don't go in the hallway." I frowned. I thought, okay, very funny. Probably a prank from Leo in the back, or just a wrong number. But before I could even lock the screen, it buzzed again. "Lock the door." That's when I felt it. That strange, cold feeling in my stomach. Like the split second before you realize you're about to be in a car accident. I looked around. I expected to see someone laughing or staring at me. But nobody reacted. Everyone was still writing. Then, the third message. "He's already inside." My heart started hammering against my ribs. I stared at the words, trying to decide if I should say something. I didn't want to look like an idiot interrupting class for a prank, so I just raised my hand. Mrs. Carter looked over. "Yes?" My phone, I just got a really weird message. A few people in the front row laughed. Mrs. Carter just sighed. "Phones away, please." But then, bzz, it buzzed again. "Why aren't you listening?" I swear my chest tightened. My fingers felt like ice. I didn't say another word. I just stood up, walked to her desk, and turned the screen around. The moment she read it, her face went white. Not confused, not annoyed, just pale. She looked at the door, then back at me. She whispered, "Where did you get this?" "I don't know," I whispered back. "Random number." Suddenly the room wasn't bored anymore. Everyone was watching us. And then my phone buzzed again. Too late. Before I could even process those two words, the loudspeaker above us exploded with static. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." Everything exploded. Mrs. Carter scrambled to the door. She slammed it shut, a loud thud, and twisted the lock. She started dragging her heavy oak desk in front of it, the wood screaming against the floorboards. "Teachers, under the desks, now! Stay away from the glass!" We scrambled. I slid down against the wall near the window, clutching my phone so hard my knuckles were white. Someone across the room whispered, "What's happening?" Nobody answered. The hallway outside was silent. And that silence, it felt wrong. It felt like the whole building was holding its breath, waiting for a heart to stop. Long pause. 3 seconds. My phone vibrated. I almost screamed. "He's on the second floor now." My eyes widened. Our room 214, was on the second floor. I crawled over and showed the screen to Mrs. Carter. I saw real, raw terror in her eyes. "Turn that phone off," she whispered, "right now." But I couldn't because the next message popped up instantly. Room 214. Gulp. My stomach dropped. Across the room, a girl whispered, "Did you hear that?" We all froze. From somewhere down the hall, there was a sound, a slow, metallic rattling. Clink. Pause. Clink. It was someone testing the door handles, one by one. Clink. Closer. Clink. The next door over. A girl in the front row started crying, just a soft, broken whimpering sound. Mrs. Carter put a finger to her lips, her hands shaking. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to look. I hated that phone. But I looked. "Don't make a sound." Whisper. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure the thing in the hallway could hear it. Then the noise stopped, right outside our door. For 5 seconds, nothing. Just the sound of 30 people trying not to breathe. And then, very slowly, our door handle moved. Slow, creaking metal. It wasn't a bang. It wasn't a hit. It was just a slow, careful turn. It twisted halfway, then stopped. A long, agonizing pause. Then steps. Step, step, step. Walking away. We sat there for 10 minutes, maybe an hour, I don't know. Time didn't exist. Finally, my phone buzzed one last time. "Good, you listened." I stared at it. I couldn't breathe. Then the final message appeared. Cold, slow voice. "Next time, answer faster." Dramatic pause. And right after that, the number disappeared. I watched it happen. The message history, the contact, everything. It just blinked out of existence, like it had never been there at all. When the police finally opened the door, they found nothing. No intruder, no footprints, no signs of a break-in. But sometimes, when I'm sitting in a quiet room, my phone vibrates, and for a split second, I'm too afraid to look at the screen.
I'd been a cop in Chicago for 20 years. Long enough to think I'd already seen everything. Long enough to believe that fear had nothing left to offer me. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning, just after 3 a.m. Rain was hammering against the windshield of my squad car, loud and relentless. I was parked in a narrow alley, sipping stale coffee, counting down the minutes until my shift finally ended. Then, the radio crackled. Dispatch said, "Unit 4, we have a 911 hang-up. Location is the county morgue." I laughed. I actually laughed. I assumed it was a prank. The morgue is locked tight overnight. The only people inside are in drawers. I grabbed the mic. "Dispatch, clarify," I said. "You mean the security guard called?" There was a pause. Then dispatch came back. "Negative, Unit 4. The signal originated from the basement, cold storage. Signal traced to drawer number 4. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly who was in drawer number 4. We brought him in earlier that morning. A John Doe, pulled from the river, dead at least 3 days. No ID, no wallet, no phone. We searched him twice. I drove over immediately. The building was dark when I arrived. Rain coated the concrete, making everything look slick, almost oily. The night guard was waiting at the front door, pale, hands shaking. "I didn't make that call, detective," he said. "I swear." "I know," I replied. "Open it." We took the stairs down to the basement. Each step felt colder than the last. The low hum of freezer units echoed through the hall. The air smelled like chemicals and old pennies. We stopped in front of the wall of metal drawers. Number 4. I wrapped my hand around the handle. The metal was freezing. "Dispatch," I said. "I'm at the location. Confirm the trace." "Signal is still active, Unit 4. It's directly in front of you." I pulled the drawer open. The body bag was there, exactly how we left it. Zipped, sealed, untouched. But there was a sound coming from inside. A faint glow flickered beneath the plastic, a soft digital light. I unzipped the bag, slowly. The John Doe lay there, gray skin, eyes closed, completely still. Resting on his chest, right over his heart, was a cell phone. The screen was lit. It was on an active call, connected to 911. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared. We never left a phone on him. The medical examiner stripped him completely. There was no phone. Then the speaker crackled. I leaned in closer. It wasn't a voice. It was breathing. Slow, wet, deliberate breathing. The body in the bag wasn't moving. His chest was perfectly still. The breathing was coming from the other end of the line. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear. "This is Detective Miller," I said. "Who is this?" Silence. Then a voice. Low, rough, scratchy. "Did you check his teeth, Detective?" My blood went cold. "Who is this?" I demanded. "Check his teeth." The line went dead. I looked back down at the body. My hands were shaking. I wasn't supposed to touch him without the medical examiner, but I had to know. I reached out and pulled his jaw open. Something was shoved inside his mouth. A small piece of paper, rolled tight. I pulled it free and unfolded it. It was a photograph, a Polaroid. It was a picture of me, taken from inside my squad car, time-stamped 5 minutes ago. The phone in my hand started ringing again. I answered it. The voice whispered, "Turn around, Detective." I spun around, hand on my holster. I expected to see a man with a knife, a gun, something. But the room was empty. Just the rows of stained steel drawers and the hum of the freezer. "Dispatch," I whispered into my radio. "I have a potential 1031 in the basement. I need backup, now." Static. I checked my radio. Dead battery. It had been full 10 minutes ago. The phone in my hand, the dead man's phone, buzzed again. A text message this time. One word. Look. I looked back at the open drawer, at the John Doe. His eyes were open. I stumbled back, hitting the metal cart behind me. The crash echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. I stared at the body. The eyes were milky, clouded over with death. They weren't seeing anything. It was just a muscle spasm, rigor mortis fading. That's what I told myself. But then I saw the chest move. A shallow, rattling breath. I didn't wait. I ran. I sprinted for the stairs, my boots slamming against the concrete. I hit the door to the lobby and burst through, gasping for air. The night guard, an old guy named Earl, was sitting at the desk. He jumped when he saw me. "Detective, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Lock the door," I wheezed. "Lock the basement door, now." I grabbed the landline on his desk to call for backup. No dial tone. The line was cut. That's when the lights went out. The emergency red lights kicked on, bathing the lobby in the color of fresh blood. "Earl," I said, keeping my voice low, "do you have a weapon?" Just my flashlight," he stammered. "Get behind the desk." We waited. Minutes felt like hours. Then we heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Something was dragging itself up the basement stairs. It sounded wet, heavy, like a wet sandbag being pulled up the steps one by one. I drew my service pistol. I aimed at the basement door. "Police!" I yelled. "Identify yourself!" The dragging stopped. Then the phone in my pocket buzzed again. The dead man's phone. I had forgotten I was still holding it. I answered it on speaker. Earl has a family detective, 2 daughters, Sarah and Emily. Earl's eyes went wide. How? Who is that? Voice, open the door, detective, or I pay them a visit. I looked at the door. I looked at Earl. He was terrified. Who are you? I demanded. Voice, I'm the one you forgot. The line went dead. Suddenly, the basement door handle turned slowly. The metal groaned. I fired a warning shot into the door frame. Back away! The handle stopped moving. Silence. Then a sound came from behind us, from the front entrance of the morgue. Someone was knocking on the glass front doors. Tap, tap, tap. I spun around. Standing outside in the rain under the flickering street lamp was a man. He was wearing a gray suit, soaking wet. He wasn't moving. He was just smiling, and he was holding a phone to his ear. Seen the realization. Earl, stay down, I said. I moved toward the glass doors, gun raised. As I got closer, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The man in the suit, he looked familiar. He looked exactly like the John Doe in the basement. Same height, same face, even the same gray, dead skin. But this one was standing, walking. My phone buzzed. Voice, let me in. It's cold out here. You're dead, I said, my voice shaking. I saw you in the drawer. The man outside tilted his head. Death is just a paperwork error, detective. He raised his hand and pressed a piece of paper against the glass. It was a police file, my police file. It was a case report from 12 years ago, the River City Strangler, a case I never solved. We found 5 bodies, but never the guy. I obsessed over it. It ruined my marriage. It almost cost me my badge. The man outside pointed a gray finger at the bottom of the page, at the signature. It wasn't signed by me. It was signed by him. The lights in the lobby flickered and died completely. Total darkness. I heard the glass front door shatter. Earl, run! I screamed. I fired blindly into the dark. Bang, bang, bang. Muzzle flashes lit up the room like strobe lights. In the flashes, I saw him. He was moving unnaturally fast, on the ceiling, crawling like a spider, limbs twisted at wrong angles. I felt a cold hand grab my ankle. I went down hard. My gun slid across the floor. I kicked out, connecting with something soft. I scrambled back, my hand finding my gun. I aimed it at the shadow looming over me. End of the line, I yelled. I pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The shadow leaned down. I could smell the river water on him, rotting algae and silt. He placed something in my hand. Then the weight lifted. The cold retreated. The backup sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights washed over the lobby. I was alone. Earl was shivering behind the desk, unharmed. The glass door was shattered, but there was no one there. No wet footprints. No body. Scene, the aftermath. They never found the John Doe. When we went back down to the basement, drawer number 4 was empty. The bag was folded neatly on the floor. The chief told me it was stress, said I hallucinated. They put me on mandatory leave. But I know what I saw, and I know what he gave me. I sat in my car that night looking at the object he placed in my hand right before the cops arrived. It was a badge. My badge. The one I lost 12 years ago during the Strangler investigation. The one I swore I dropped in the river. It was clean, polished, and on the back, scratched into the metal, was a date. Tomorrow's date. I don't sleep anymore. I sit by the window watching the street, because my phone just rang again, and the caller ID says, drawer number 4. I didn't know there was a rule about leaving before morning. No sign mentioned it. No one explained it, and that was the problem. I was driving through the mountains late in the afternoon, following a route that had slowly climbed higher than I expected. The trees grew thicker the farther I went, and the temperature dropped in a way that felt sudden, like someone had flipped a switch. My phone lost signal without warning. 1 bar, then nothing. I wasn't lost, but I also wasn't sure how far the next town was. That's when I saw the sign. 2 wooden posts stood just off the road, holding up a single board. The paint was faded and uneven, like it had been touched up too many times over the years. It said only one word: Lodge. No name, no distance, no arrow. I slowed down, passed it, then stopped the car completely. I sat there for a few seconds, engine idling, trying to decide if I really needed to stop. I could probably keep driving, maybe find a gas station, maybe find signal again. But the sun was already low, slipping behind the ridgeline, and the road ahead disappeared into shadows faster than I liked. I turned around. The road leading to the lodge was narrow but well maintained. No potholes, no fallen branches. That detail stuck with me later. Someone was taking care of it. The lodge sat in a shallow clearing surrounded by tall trees. It was bigger than I expected. 3 floors, wide windows, warm yellow light glowing from inside. From a distance, it looked welcoming in a quiet, unadvertised way, like it didn't need to convince anyone to stop there. I parked near the entrance and stepped out of the car. The air was cold and completely still. No wind, no insects, no distant sound of traffic, just silence and the faint hum of the building. Inside, the lobby smelled like old wood and cleaning solution. The space was simple but clean. A long wooden desk ran along one wall, polished smooth from years of use. A small bell sat on top. Behind the desk were rows of wooden cubbies with brass number plates. Keys, I assumed. I rang the bell once. Nothing happened. I rang it again, louder this time. After a moment, a door behind the desk opened and a man stepped out. He looked to be in his late 40s, gray starting to show at the sides of his hair. Clean clothes, calm posture. His expression didn't change when he saw me. "Evening," he said. His voice was steady, neutral, not friendly, not unfriendly. I asked if they had any rooms available. He nodded immediately. "Yes," he said. "Just for tonight?" The question caught me slightly off guard, not because it was strange, but because of how certain he sounded, like he already knew the answer. I told him yes, just one night. He reached into one of the cubbies and slid a key across the desk toward me, a simple metal key attached to a wooden tag. 214. "No breakfast," he said, as if reading from a list. "Checkout is before morning." I let out a small laugh, thinking it was a joke, or maybe a quirky way of saying early checkout. "Before morning?" I asked. He didn't smile. "Yes," he said again. There was a pause. Not awkward, intentional. I nodded, unsure why my chest suddenly felt tight. I took the key and thanked him. He didn't respond, already turning back toward the door he came from. The staircase to the second floor was to the left of the desk. As I climbed, the sounds of my footsteps seemed louder than they should have been. The building absorbed noise in a way that felt unnatural. The hallway on the second floor was long and softly lit. The carpet was clean and thick, muting every step. Every door was closed. No sounds, no televisions, no voices. No indication that anyone else was staying there. 214 was at the far end of the hall. Inside, the room was simple and spotless. The bed was neatly made. The desk was clear. The curtains were half drawn, letting in the last traces of daylight. Nothing felt personal. Nothing felt used. I dropped my bag near the bed and sat down, finally allowing myself to relax. That's when I noticed the clock on the nightstand. It read 5:42 p.m. I checked my phone. 6:19 p.m. I frowned, assuming the clock was wrong. Old building, old clocks. It didn't seem important at the time. That was the first thing I ignored, and it wouldn't be the last.
I went back downstairs a little later, around what my phone said was 7:30. The lobby looked the same as before. Quiet, clean, still. No new sounds, no new movement. It was like the building reset itself when I wasn't looking. A doorway beside the desk led into the dining area. Long wooden tables, simple chairs. No decorations, no windows. Just warm overhead lights and the smell of food that had been sitting out for a while. There was a chalkboard mounted near the entrance. 3 items written neatly in white chalk. Stew, bread, tea. No prices, no options. I sat at one of the tables, expecting someone to come out eventually. I didn't have to wait long. The same man from the desk appeared, carrying a tray. He set the bowl in front of me, placed the bread beside it, and poured tea into a cup without asking how I wanted it. I thanked him. He nodded once. The stew tasted fine. Not good, not bad. Warm and filling, like it was designed to do one thing and nothing more. I ate slowly, listening for any sign that I wasn't alone in the building. There was nothing. I tried to make conversation, asked how long the lodge had been there. Long enough, he said. I asked if many people stayed there during this season. Some, he replied. Every answer felt complete, like adding more words would break a rule I didn't know about. Eventually, I stopped asking. When I finished eating, the overhead lights dimmed slightly. Not enough to notice immediately, but enough to feel. The man was suddenly standing beside the table. That's your signal, he said. For what? I asked. For night. Not evening. Not late. Night. I went back upstairs. The hallway looked the same as before, but something about it felt tighter, like the space had suddenly narrowed. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The room felt colder than it had earlier. I closed the curtains completely and lay down on the bed, telling myself I was overthinking everything. Sleep didn't come easily, not because of noise, because of the lack of it. There were no footsteps, no doors opening or closing, no pipes knocking in the walls. Even the building settling into the cold night was silent. It felt like the lodge was actively suppressing sound. At some point, I woke up. The room was dark, but my eyes adjusted quickly. I checked the clock on the nightstand. 3:11 a.m. I reached for my phone. 2:47 a.m. I stared at both screens longer than I should have. I told myself one of them was wrong. Probably the clock. Old building, cheap electronics. I turned over and tried to sleep again. That's when I started dreaming. I was walking down the second-floor hallway. The carpet absorbed my footsteps completely. The doors were closed as before, identical and evenly spaced. The lights above me began turning off, one by one, starting from the far end. Not behind me. Ahead. Each time a light went out, the darkness moved closer, forcing me forward. I tried to turn around, but the hallway stretched longer instead. Endless. Narrow. Silent. I woke up suddenly. The room was darker than before. Not night dark. Something else. I reached for my phone. 6:09 a.m. That didn't make sense. The room should have been filling with light. Morning always arrived earlier in the mountains, but the windows were completely black. I sat up, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Then it happened. At 6:12 a.m., every light in the building turned off at the same time. No flicker, no warning, just darkness. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt intentional, like the building was waiting to see what I would do next. I stood up slowly and opened the door. The hallway was pitch black. No emergency lights, no exit signs. Nothing. I stepped out, keeping one hand against the wall as I moved toward the stairs. The air felt heavier, colder, like the temperature had dropped all at once. Halfway down the hall, my foot brushed against something that shouldn't have been there. I stopped and reached out. The wall was smooth. Too smooth. I moved my hand to where my neighbor's door should have been. There was nothing there. No doorframe, no handle, no gap. Just solid wall. I felt panic rise in my throat as I moved farther down the hallway, checking where every door had been. They were all gone. Not open, not locked. Gone. That's when I started running.
I stayed in the car for a long time after driving away. The road felt normal again. Too normal. The trees passed by at a steady pace, the tires hummed against the asphalt, and the sky slowly brightened the way mornings always do. That should have comforted me. It didn't. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the lodge standing behind me where the road curved. But there was nothing. Just empty mountain road and fog drifting low between the trees. When I finally stopped at a small gas station an hour later, the attendant asked if I was okay. He said I looked pale. I told him I hadn't slept well. That was true, but not enough.
While filling up, I checked my phone again. The time was normal. The date was correct. There were missed notifications from earlier in the night, messages that had never come through while I was at the lodge. That bothered me more than anything else. It meant time hadn't stopped. Whatever happened there had fit perfectly inside the real world. I drove home and tried to forget about it. For a while, I almost succeeded. Weeks passed, then months. The memory dulled around the edges, like something I'd imagined during exhaustion. I told the story once, casually, to a friend. He laughed and said it sounded like a bad horror movie. I agreed and never brought it up again. But small things started happening. I began waking up before sunrise without an alarm, always between 6:10 and 6:20 a.m., no matter what time I went to bed. When I checked the clock, it was always within that window. Sometimes I would wake up already standing. Once, I found myself in the hallway outside my bedroom, hand resting against the wall, breathing hard like I'd been running. I had no memory of getting there. That's when I started hearing the silence again. Not actual silence, structured silence, the kind that feels deliberate. It happened in quiet places, empty stairwells, late-night parking garages, hotel hallways when everyone else was asleep. The sound would fade, not gradually, but all at once, leaving behind a pressure in the air that made my ears ring. Every time my heart would race, and I'd feel the urge to leave immediately. I learned to listen to that instinct. About a year later, I was traveling again for work. Different state, different mountain range, different season. I booked a hotel near the highway, nothing remote, nothing old. I checked in late. The clerk handed me my key and said, "Checkout is before morning." He froze after saying it. His eyes widened slightly, like he hadn't meant to say that. He cleared his throat and corrected himself quickly. "I mean, checkout's at 11. I didn't stay. I left my key on the desk and walked out without explaining. I drove until sunrise and slept in my car at a rest stop, lights on, radio playing quietly so the silence couldn't settle.
I arrived just before sunset. I remember that clearly because the light didn't match the time of day. The sun was still visible above the hills, but the town already looked like it had decided the day was over. Shadows sat longer than they should have. The air felt still, like it had stopped moving hours ago. I wasn't supposed to stop there. I had been driving for most of the afternoon, following the highway toward the city. The plan was simple: get there before dark, find a place to sleep, and continue in the morning. But about 40 minutes earlier, traffic slowed to a stop. Electronic signs flashed a message about a road closure ahead. No explanation, just arrows pointing toward a detour. The GPS rerouted me automatically. At first, the road was fine. 2 lanes, fresh paint, a few cars ahead of me. Then, gradually, the traffic thinned out. 1 car turned off, then another. Eventually, it was just me, driving through low hills with trees pressed close on both sides. That was when the town appeared. There was no warning, no sign announcing it, no welcome board. Just a cluster of buildings sitting beside the road, like they had been placed there deliberately and then forgotten. I slowed down without realizing it. The first thing I noticed was how clean everything looked. Not freshly cleaned, just maintained. Sidewalks without cracks, painted fences without peeling, no trash on the road, no overgrown grass. The second thing I noticed was the silence. No distant engines, no dogs barking, no music coming from inside buildings. The town wasn't dead. It was simply quiet. I parked near what looked like the center. A diner stood on one corner, lights glowing warmly inside. Across from it, a post office. Next to that, a hardware store, with its door open and a man standing just inside, counting cash. There were people outside. A woman watered flowers in front of her house. 2 teenagers sat on a bench near the diner, elbows on their knees, looking down the road. An older man swept his porch slowly, methodically, as if he had nowhere else to be. When they noticed me, they smiled. All of them. The smiles weren't friendly exactly. They weren't unfriendly either. They were neutral, held a second too long. like something practiced. I grabbed my jacket and stepped out of the car. The air felt heavier than it should have, like humidity without the heat. I nodded politely as I walked past the bench. The teenagers nodded back. They didn't speak. I went into the diner. A small bell rang when I opened the door. Inside, the lights were bright but soft, casting long shadows beneath the tables. 3 booths were occupied. Each person sat alone. None of them were eating. A woman stood behind the counter. She looked up and smiled. "Evening," she said. Her voice was calm, flat in a way that wasn't unfriendly, just controlled.
I ordered a coffee. She poured it carefully, watching the cup the entire time, as if spilling even a drop would be a problem. When she slid it toward me, her hands were steady. The coffee tasted normal, hot, bitter, real. That helped me relax more than it should have. I asked if there was somewhere nearby I could stay for the night, a motel, a room, anything. She nodded immediately, like she had been expecting the question. "2 streets down," she said. "You'll see it." I thanked her, took another sip. Then, without thinking, I asked the question, "What's this town called?" The coffee pot stopped mid-pour. No one turned to look at me. Instead, the room seemed to pause. The woman's smile didn't fade, but her eyes shifted slightly toward the front window. "We don't really use the name anymore," she said. Her tone didn't change. That made it worse. "Oh," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Why not?" She set the pot down gently, aligning it with the edge of the counter. "You should check in before it gets dark," she said. I waited. The man in the booth closest to me cleared his throat. Another stared down at his hands. No one added anything. I finished my coffee in silence and paid. The woman thanked me like nothing strange had happened. When I stepped back outside, the street was empty. Not abandoned, just empty. Every door was closed, every curtain fully drawn. The same building stood there, unchanged, but the people were gone. I checked my phone. Still had signal. Still early. The sun hadn't set yet. I stood there longer than I should have, listening. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Eventually, I walked toward the place the woman had mentioned. 2 streets down, a building stood with lights on and a single desk visible through the window. No sign, no name, just a door that opened when I tried it. A man sat behind the desk. He looked up when I entered, already reaching for a key. "Evening," he said. He didn't ask for my ID, didn't ask where I was coming from or how long I planned to stay. He slid the key toward me and said, "Breakfast ends early." I asked what time. He paused, just for a moment. "Before you wake up," he said. I laughed, expecting him to smile. He didn't. That night, as I lay on the bed with the lights off, I watched the street through the window. At exactly the same moment, every light in town went out.
I woke up before the alarm. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how quiet everything felt. Not the normal quiet of early morning, but something deeper. No pipes rattling, no distant engines, no doors opening. It felt like the town was holding its breath. I checked the clock. 6:02 a.m. The street outside my window was empty. Streetlights were still on, casting pale yellow circles onto the pavement. Every house looked the same as it had the night before. Curtains drawn, doors closed. Nothing moved. I showered, dressed, and went outside. The moment I stepped onto the sidewalk, the town came back to life. Lights flicked on behind windows, doors opened. Somewhere a radio started playing softly. The suddenness of it made me stop walking. It was like everything had been waiting for me to look away. I went back to the diner. The bell rang again when I opened the door. Inside, the same 3 people sat in the same booths, same positions, same posture. None of them were eating. The woman behind the counter smiled at me. "Morning," she said. She poured coffee before I asked. I decided not to bring up the name of the town again. Instead, I asked if there was a gas station nearby. "Yes," she replied. "Is it open?" I asked. She nodded. "But you won't need it." I hadn't said I was leaving. I took a sip of coffee and felt that familiar tension return, tightening behind my eyes. As I paid, I noticed a small sign taped near the register. "Closed after dark." No hours listed, just that. I spent the morning walking. Every street curved gently inward. Even the ones that looked straight eventually bent back toward the center. I tried counting intersections, but I kept losing track. After 20 minutes, I found myself back near the diner again. There were more signs, on shop doors, on fences, on poles. "Local business only. No visitors past this point. Do not wait outside after sunset." No explanations, no logos, all written in the same plain lettering. I asked a man sweeping his porch what time the bus came through town. He didn't stop sweeping. "There is no bus," he said. "How do people leave?" I asked. The broom paused. He looked up at me for the first time. "You're asking the wrong kind of questions," he said. Then he went back to sweeping. That afternoon, a siren sounded. It wasn't loud, it wasn't urgent, just a single steady tone that hung in the air. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Then, calmly, they went inside. Doors closed, curtains drew shut. I stood alone in the street. That was when I realized something. Nobody here was afraid. They were prepared.
I decided to leave after dark. I didn't know why I chose that time. Maybe it was because I didn't want anyone watching, or maybe because staying another night felt worse than leaving. I packed quietly. When I stepped outside, the streetlights were already on. The town looked exactly the same as it had the night before. Empty. Waiting. My car started immediately. The engine sounded too loud in the silence. I drove slowly toward the edge of town, following the same road I had arrived on. The first sign I passed had no distance listed, just an arrow. The second sign pointed the same way. The third pointed back. I drove anyway. The diner appeared on my left, then again. The third time, I stopped the car. The teenagers were back on the bench. They hadn't been there earlier. I rolled down the window. "I'm leaving," I said. One of them stood up. "You already are," he said. The road stretched forward again after that. The faded sign appeared in my headlights. As I passed it, my phone buzzed. Signal returned. The air felt lighter. I didn't look back. I drove for hours before stopping. When I checked the map, the town wasn't there. No name, no road, no marker. Weeks later, I still think about it. About the rules, about the smiles, about the question I shouldn't have asked. Sometimes, late at night, my phone lights up. No notification, no message, just silence.
He ignored one warning. It was just after midnight when he noticed the road sign was missing. Not damaged. Not broken. Just not there. He was driving through a rural part of the state, somewhere between small towns. The kind of place where gas stations close early and streetlights are optional. He had taken this route because his navigation app suggested it. A shortcut. 5 minutes faster. That's all it promised. At first, the road felt normal. 2 lanes. Faded white lines. Trees set back just far enough to feel open. The radio was on low. Some late-night talk show he wasn't really listening to. Then the streetlights stopped. He didn't think much of it at first. Plenty of roads go dark outside town limits. But after a while, the darkness felt thicker. He turned the radio down. That wasn't intentional. His hand just did it. On both sides of the road, the forest closed in. The trees weren't tall and clean like postcards. They were messy, uneven, branches bent in strange directions. The kind of forest that looks untouched. He checked the dashboard clock. 12:07 a.m. He remembers thinking, I should have been home by now. Not panicking. Just noticing. A few minutes later, he realized something else. There were no signs. No speed limit. No warnings. No reflective markers. Just road. He slowed down. The tires made a different sound now, like the pavement had changed. He glanced at his phone mounted on the dashboard. The map still showed a clean, confident blue line. Everything was fine, according to the screen. He laughed quietly to himself and said out loud, "It's just a road." Hearing his own voice made him feel better. Then he saw it. Not something on the road. Something missing. There should have been a turn sign ahead. He knew that instinctively. The road curved slightly, but there was nothing warning him. That was the moment he hesitated. He lifted his foot off the accelerator. Just a little. His body reacted before his thoughts did. Should I turn back? He wondered. The thought came and went quickly. Almost embarrassed. Then another thought replaced it. I've already come this far. That thought felt logical. Responsible. Turning back would mean admitting the shortcut was a mistake. Wasting time. Wasting fuel. So he kept going. Psychologists call this commitment bias. Once we commit to a choice, our brain works harder to justify continuing than to consider stopping. Not because it's safer, but because stopping feels like failure. The road narrowed. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice. The trees pressed closer. The headlights didn't reach as far anymore. The darkness ahead looked solid. His phone vibrated. No service. He swallowed. Tried to stay calm. Lots of places don't have signal, he told himself. That's normal. The road curved again. This time, sharper. Still no signs. He said quietly, "Okay. This is getting weird." There was no one to hear him. After another minute, he noticed there were no places to turn around. No driveways. No pull-offs. No gravel shoulders. Just trees and road. That's when the silence changed. Before, it was quiet. Now, it felt empty. He turned the headlights to high beam. The forest lit up suddenly. Branches. Trunks. Reflections. He told himself not to be stupid. Then the road ended. Not slowly. Not with warning. Just ended. The pavement stopped. Beyond it was dirt, rocks, and darkness. He hit the brakes hard. The car jolted. The engine kept running. For a few seconds, he didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't think. Then he whispered, "What the hell?" There was no barrier. No dead-end sign. No explanation. He put the car in reverse. Slowly. Carefully. His hands were shaking now. As he turned around, the forest looked different. Closer. More crowded. Driving back felt longer. Every curve felt sharper. Every shadow felt intentional. When he finally reached a paved road with signs and reflectors, his chest loosened. He pulled over. Just for a moment. Later, he tried to explain it away. Bad maps. Old roads. Construction. Normal reasons. But when he thought about it honestly, he knew the truth. The warning wasn't the dead end. The warning wasn't the darkness. The warning wasn't the missing signs. The warning was the moment he hesitated. And ignored it. Because instincts don't explain themselves. They don't argue. They don't panic. They whisper. Once. Most wrong turns don't feel dangerous at first. They feel reasonable. Familiar. Comfortable. And that's why people stay on them far too long.
This happened last Halloween, and honestly, I still don't fully understand what we walked into that night. It started when one of my friends sent a screenshot to our group chat around 9 p.m. It was an online post about a Halloween party happening at some house just outside the city. None of us had heard of it before, but the post made it sound like a big thing. Music, costumes, people everywhere. At that point, we were already bored. The party we had been at earlier was dying out, and most people were leaving. So my friend Jake said, "Why not? Let's check it out." There were 4 of us total. Me, Jake, our friend Tyler, and Tyler's girlfriend Amanda. Looking back, it probably should have seemed weird that none of us knew anyone hosting the party, but it was Halloween. Weird stuff is normal on Halloween. The address led us about 20 minutes outside the city. As we got closer, the streets got quieter. Fewer houses, fewer streetlights, just long stretches of dark road with trees on both sides. Eventually, our GPS told us to turn down a small road that looked like it barely got any traffic. At the end of that road was the house. The first thing I noticed was how dark it was. Not just the house, the entire area. There were no decorations outside, no cars parked along the road, no lights in the windows. It honestly looked abandoned. Jake slowed the car and frowned. "This doesn't look like a party." Amanda leaned forward from the back seat and said, "Maybe everyone's inside?" Then Tyler pointed toward the house. "Wait, do you guys hear that?" At first, I didn't hear anything, but after a second, faint music started drifting through the air. It sounded like a party playlist. Bass, voices, something playing upstairs. Jake shrugged. "See? Told you." So we parked near the house and got out. The cold air hit immediately, and I remember thinking how quiet everything else was. No people talking outside, no laughing, just the faint music coming from inside the house. The front door was slightly open. Jake pushed it open the rest of the way and stepped inside first. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. We followed him into the living room. The place looked old. Dusty furniture, faded carpet, pictures on the wall that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. It definitely didn't look like a house hosting a party, but the music was louder now. It was definitely coming from upstairs. Tyler laughed nervously. "Okay, this is already creepy." Jake rolled his eyes. "Relax, people are probably upstairs." Amanda stayed close to Tyler. I noticed she kept glancing back toward the front door like she wanted to leave. We walked toward the staircase. Every step creaked loudly as we went up. And the weird part was, the music didn't sound like it was coming from a crowded room. There were no voices, no cheering, just music. When we reached the top of the stairs, the hallway was completely dark except for a small light at the end. The music was coming from the last room. Jake started walking toward it. Halfway down the hallway, the music suddenly just completely stopped. The silence felt heavy. Tyler whispered, nervous, "Okay, that's not funny." Jake reached the door and slowly pushed it open. The room was empty. There was an old speaker sitting on the floor. It was still on, but no music was playing anymore, just a faint static sound. Jake looked down at it and said, confused, "What the hell?" That's when we heard it. Whisper. Footsteps. Behind us. Running down the hallway. Fast. Amanda gasped and grabbed Tyler's arm. "Did you hear that?" The footsteps stopped right outside the room. But when we all turned toward the hallway, there was nobody there. Slow breathing. Jake stepped out of the room and looked both directions down the hallway. Empty. Tyler shook his head slowly, uneasy. "Okay, I don't like this." Amanda was already moving toward the stairs, nervous. "Can we please just leave?" None of us argued. We walked down the hallway together, a little faster this time. As we reached the top of the stairs, I glanced back one last time, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move near the end of the hallway. A shadow. Tall. standing completely still. Tense whisper. But when I blinked, it was gone. At that point, we practically ran down the stairs and out the front door. Nobody said anything until we were back in Jake's car. Jake started the engine and pulled away from the house quickly. For a few minutes, the car was completely silent. Then Tyler finally said, "Did anyone else hear those footsteps?" All three of us nodded. Amanda spoke quietly from the back seat, shaken. "There was nobody upstairs." Jake frowned, thinking, maybe someone was messing with us. But something about that didn't make sense. There were no cars outside, no lights, no signs that anyone else had been there. About 10 minutes later, Tyler pulled out his phone. "Wait, guys." He turned the screen toward us. The party post. It was gone. Deleted. Jake asked seriously, "What do you mean, gone?" Tyler refreshed the page again. Nothing. No post. No event. No address. Slow breath. Like it had never existed at all. And the strangest part? About a week later, I drove past that road again during the day, just to see the house one more time. But when I reached the end of the road, quiet. The house wasn't there. Just an empty clearing. Like nothing had ever been built there at all.
Last Halloween, I decided to work late driving rideshare. Halloween is usually one of the busiest nights for drivers, so I figured I could make some extra money before heading home. For the first few hours, everything felt completely normal. I picked up people leaving costume parties, groups of friends heading to bars, and a few tired people who just wanted to get home. Some riders were loud and excited, others were half asleep in the back seat, but nothing strange happened. By the time it got close to 2 a.m., the streets started getting much quieter. Most of the ride requests had slowed down and entire blocks were starting to look empty. I was driving through a neighborhood that had almost no traffic when I noticed someone standing alone under a streetlight near the sidewalk. The person was wearing a long dark coat and some kind of mask or hood that covered most of their face. At first, I didn't think anything of it because it was Halloween and people were wearing all kinds of strange costumes that night. I slowed down slightly, expecting my phone to buzz with a ride request from that exact location, but my phone stayed silent. As I drove closer, the person slowly raised their hand like they were signaling for me to stop. Normally, I only pick up riders who request through the app, but sometimes people try to flag down drivers directly when they can't get a ride. Since the streets were empty and I didn't see any other cars around, I decided to pull over for a second. The passenger walked toward the car and quietly opened the back door before sitting down. The door closed behind them and the car felt suddenly heavier with someone in the back seat. "Hey," I said casually while glancing at them through the rearview mirror. "Where are you headed?" The passenger didn't respond. I figured they were just tired or maybe drunk from a party, which isn't unusual on Halloween night. I slowly pulled back onto the road and checked my phone to see if the ride request had finally come through. It hadn't. I refreshed the app once, thinking maybe it just hadn't updated yet, but the screen still showed no ride request at all. That's when I felt the first strange feeling that something wasn't right. I looked up at the mirror again. The passenger was sitting perfectly still in the back seat with their heads slightly tilted downward, like they were staring at the floor. I couldn't see their face clearly because the hood and the darkness inside the car covered most of it. "Hey," I said again, "did you request a ride?" The passenger didn't move. They didn't speak. The car felt unusually quiet, almost like the air inside had gotten heavier. After another minute, I pulled the car slowly to the side of the road and looked at the app again just to make sure I wasn't missing something. There was still nothing. No request, no destination, no notification. I turned slightly in my seat so I could face the back seat better. "I think you might have gotten into the wrong car," I said. "I'm not seeing your ride and the—" I stopped speaking immediately. The back seat was empty. Completely empty. My brain froze for a second as I tried to understand what I was looking at. Just a moment earlier, someone had been sitting there. I had watched them open the door and sit down. But now the seat was completely empty, like nobody had ever been there. I looked quickly at both doors, thinking maybe they somehow got out while the car was moving, but the doors were still closed. Then something else caught my attention.
The seatbelt in the back seat was buckled, exactly where the passenger had been sitting. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to figure out if I was imagining things. Slowly, I reached my hand back and pressed the button to release it. The metal clicked loudly in the quiet car. I took a deep breath and tried to convince myself that maybe I was just tired from working all night. I started driving again, hoping the strange feeling would go away. But about 30 seconds later, something in the rearview mirror made my stomach drop. The seatbelt was slowly moving across the seat, like someone had leaned back against it. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I stared at the mirror. The seatbelt was buckled again, but the seat itself still looked empty. I felt a cold wave of panic run through me. At that point, I didn't want to keep driving on the dark road anymore, so I quickly turned toward the nearest gas station a few blocks away. The bright lights from the station came into view, and I pulled into the parking lot as fast as I could. I parked right under one of the overhead lights and turned around immediately to look at the back seat again. The seatbelt was unbuckled. The seat was empty. It looked completely normal, like nothing strange had happened at all. I sat there for a minute trying to calm my breathing before stepping out of the car. I opened the back door and looked inside just to be sure. There was no one there. No sign that anyone had ever been in the car. I closed the door slowly and leaned against the side of the car, still trying to understand what had just happened. That's when my phone buzzed in my hand. A new ride request had appeared on the screen. When I looked at the pickup location, my chest tightened immediately. It was the exact same street corner where I had picked up that passenger. I stared at the screen for a moment before opening the rider profile. Instead of a normal profile picture, there was just a blank gray silhouette. Under the picture was the rider's name. It simply said, "Passenger." I declined the request immediately and ended my shift right there. I drove home after that and didn't take another ride that night. And ever since then, whenever I'm driving alone late at night, I always check the rearview mirror, just to make sure the back seat is still empty. Last Halloween, I went to 2 different parties in one night, and that's when I started noticing the same costume following me everywhere. It started pretty normal. Around 9 p.m., a friend invited me to a Halloween party at someone's house a few neighborhoods away. I didn't have a costume planned, so I just threw together something simple, grabbed a jacket, and drove over. When I got there, the place was already packed. Music was loud, people were laughing, and everyone had some kind of costume on. Zombies, vampires, superheroes, the usual stuff. For the first hour or so, I was just hanging out in the living room, talking with a couple friends, when I noticed someone standing in the corner of the room. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It was just another costume. But the more I looked at it, the stranger it felt. The person was wearing a tall, black outfit with a completely blank white mask. No eyes painted on it, no mouth, just a smooth white face staring forward. The weird part wasn't really the costume, though. It was how the person was standing. Completely still. They weren't talking to anyone. They weren't holding a drink. They weren't even moving. They were just standing there facing the room like they were watching everyone. I nudged my friend Mark and pointed toward the corner. "Quiet. You know that guy?" Mark looked over for a second and shrugged. Casual. Probably someone's friend. That seemed like a reasonable answer, so I ignored it and went back to talking. But every once in a while, I'd glance over there again, and every time I looked, the figure was still standing in the exact same spot. About an hour later, my friends decided to head to another party across town. Someone they knew was hosting it, and apparently it was supposed to be bigger. So we all left together and drove over. The second party was at an apartment building downtown. When we walked inside, the place was even more crowded than the first one. Music blasting, people everywhere, costumes filling the hallway and living room. For a while, I completely forgot about the strange costume from the first party. Until I saw it again. I was walking into the kitchen when I noticed someone standing near the doorway. The same tall black outfit, the same blank white mask, standing perfectly still. My stomach tightened immediately. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just another person wearing a similar costume. Halloween costumes repeat all the time, but something about it felt off. It was the exact same mask, the exact same height, the exact same way of standing completely motionless. I walked over to Mark again and said, "Dude, that guy from the other party is here." Mark looked where I pointed and frowned. Confused. "What guy?" "The mask," I said quietly. Mark stared for a second and shrugged again. Dismissive. "Man, there are like 10 people wearing masks here." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Still, the feeling didn't go away. Every time I looked toward that part of the room, the masked figure was still standing there. Not talking, not drinking, just watching. Around 1 a.m., I decided to leave. The party was getting crowded and loud, and I had work the next morning anyway. I said goodbye to a couple friends and walked out of the building alone. The streets were mostly empty at that point. Cold air, quiet sidewalks, the usual late-night city noise in the distance. I started walking toward my car, which I had parked about half a block away. That's when I noticed someone standing across the street under a streetlight. Tall, wearing black. My steps slowed. The person stepped slightly forward into the light. The white mask reflected the yellow streetlight. It was the same mask. My chest tightened instantly. For a second, I stood there staring, trying to convince myself it was just another random costume, but the way the person was standing, it was exactly the same as before. Still, watching. Then something else happened. The figure slowly turned its head toward me and started walking. Not fast, just slow steps across the street. I immediately unlocked my car and got inside as quickly as I could. My hands were shaking slightly as I started the engine. Before pulling away, I glanced up at the windshield. The masked figure had stopped walking. They were standing right under the streetlight now, facing my car. Just watching. I drove away immediately. The entire drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the same figure somehow behind me. But the road stayed empty. When I finally got home, I parked in front of my house and sat in the car for a moment, letting the quiet settle. Then I stepped out and started walking toward my front door. Halfway up the driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Across the street, under the streetlight, someone was standing there, tall, wearing black, and the white mask reflected the light again. Exactly the same mask, exactly the same costume, standing completely still, watching me. I went inside my house as fast as I could and locked the door behind me. I checked the window a few seconds later. The street was empty again. But even now, every Halloween when I see someone wearing a blank white mask, I always look twice, just to make sure it's not the same one.